In this episode, we're going to look at another cassette deck. Now, this one came in with the complaint that it doesn't sound very good. So I don't know what to expect. I don't know if anybody's worked on this before. I assume that probably somebody has done some work on this one, but it doesn't sound good. So this is a Yamaha, and we're going to have to take a look and see what's causing the problem. Let's check it out. Today I have a Yamaha Natural Sound stereo cassette deck. This is a K520, which is a two-head deck with Dolby B and C noise reduction. This one was, it's a two-motor design too. This was shipped in from a viewer who says it doesn't work. So before I even plug it in, let's take the top off it and give it a visual inspection. I always like to give units a visual inspection before plugging them in, just in case it has something like a belt that's been wound around a motor and could damage the motor. So if the motor is stalled, it could burn it out. So I want to make sure that we don't have any belts that are going to cause a problem and could do damage. So as I say, first thing first, remove the top and inspect. If we look down through here, we can see that the belt is actually not broken. Belt actually appears to have a fair bit of tension on it too, so the belt may be okay. Okay, let's give it power and see whether it turns on. I see the tape counter is lighting up, LED tape counter. So that part's working. Is the motor turning? Nothing turning here. Let's try putting a tape in and see whether it does anything once I load a tape. Okay, let's see if this thing does anything. Rewind works. Fast forward works. And on play, oh, the tape is moving. I wonder what the problem with it is. Oh, is it not putting on both channels? It sounds like one channel's low. Yeah. We'll try another tape. Now that I know it's not shooting up my tapes, let's just put on a tape that's properly recorded. Seems like one channel's low. Hissing too. And the speed is off by a mile. Sounds a little bit slow. Sounds slow. Let me just check the speed with the speed tape. We'll see how far the speed is off. It sounds a little bit on the slow side. Oh, listen to that flutter. And it is way off, but... And then it just stopped. Yeah, it flutters like crazy. But we lost sound. What happened there? Why did we lose sound? For some reason, my amplifier cut out and came back. Not the deck, because you can see the signal still on the meters. That wow and flutter is pretty bad. It's almost like every time the capstan makes a rotation, there's a speed variation. Could be something on the flywheel. It could be a bad belt too. Well, here's a good shot. You see the belt? The belt is riding back and forth on the pulley. It's probably too thin a belt. Problem with a lot of these Chinese replacements that you buy off eBay, even when they say, oh, it's the right belt, chances are it's too thin. You can see the belt. You see it wobbling back and forth on that pulley? That's where that wow is coming from. You can hear it. And if I push the belt a bit by hand, it'll actually bring the speed up. See? And the flutter's gone away too. It's probably a little bit too tight as well. But you can definitely see that that belt is the incorrect belt for this unit. Of course, this is one of those ugly decks that Yamaha and Technics and stuff made. They were not service friendly. A lot of them were not service friendly anyway. Not all of them, but a lot of them were not service friendly. We're going to pull the bottom off this one and just take a look and see what we're up against to change that belt out. But a lot of these decks of this era, they were when plastic started to really get heavily used, and they became a lot more difficult to service than earlier models. Looks like there's a foot missing off this one too. Remove the bottom. I gotta remove these screws. I gotta remove the faceplate off this as well, if I remember. I used to service these things, 20 odd years ago. The bottom comes off. Yeah, the tape deck itself is enclosed in here. I think it comes out from the front on this one, if I'm not mistaken. The front panel comes off and then the deck pulls out from the front. So remove all the screws. And then the front panel should lift off. It's held in place by the wires going to the buttons. They should unplug right there. And then the actual deck itself will lift out, and there's speed adjustment on the back here. There's 4 more screws to lift this out. See the VU meters on here, this was like an early type of BGA chip that they used on here. Our chips actually soldered right down. These are the drivers for the display. This was the beginning of the basically the throwaway decks. They were built in such a way that the amount of work required to service them a lot of times made them uneconomical to repair, just because they required so much disassembly to get to anything. You have to pull this display board out in order to get one of the screws out for the deck. One thing to note on this unit is the motor is a clockwise motor, not a counterclockwise. That's why it's mounted where it is. Most tape decks have the motor sticking out the back and they use a counterclockwise motor. Not this one. So The motor goes on this one. It's actually harder to find a motor for one of these because it spins the opposite direction that you know, the 99% of the other cassette decks run. We've got basically almost a fully plastic mechanism on this one. I mean, they probably passed it off as some composite, but it's plastic. So this is the actual transport itself. Just slips right out, all in one piece. There should be a plug that comes out here as well to undo it. There's a couple of plugs, one here and one over here, and another one back here, and I think there's one more over here. Once you undo the plugs, then the entire transport will lift out. When I was working in the business, I hated Yamaha. I just despised it. And then when the shop started carrying Yamaha, I wasn't happy, because that meant that I couldn't refuse to service it. You know, I could always pick which companies I wanted to work on, right? And if somebody had a product that was a pain in the ass to work on, I could give them a huge estimate to the point where they would not want to repair it. And that worked for a while, and then we started selling Yamaha. And once we started selling Yamaha, well, then it became, okay, now I can't just punt the unit that I don't want to work on, because there was a good chance that we had sold the unit. And if I punted a unit, if I gave somebody a huge estimate because they didn't want to work on it, and it was one that we sold, it would come back to bite me in the ass, because I'd have the owner of the shop bitching at me because I punted one of his customers. Anyway, it's all plastic, as you can see. All plastic. This is all plastic. I think they say it's a composite, but it's still plastic. Anyway, to change the belts on this one here, it's actually not that difficult once you've got the unit apart, because this plate lifts off, and then there's the belt here. And looks like somebody's been in here, because they've trapped this blue wire under the screw. We remove. I don't know if I'm going to have a belt that's going to work on this. I'm going to try and find one. And there should be one more screw here. I think that's it. And then this plate will lift off. It lifts up out of the way, and then this plate will just lift out of the way. Once I get the wires out, of course, that are holding it in place. But anyway, yeah, I used to, as I say, I hated Yamaha. Fortunately, I had an audio guy that worked with me, and I used to give it to him, and he'd curse them too. Okay, that's about all I have to take this out. I can slip it out like that, and then the belt comes off. And as I say, it's one of those thin, oh, look at this, Chinesium belt. Very, very poor. Let's see if I can find something that will work on that. Fingers crossed I have one. Otherwise, I may have to just order one in and wait. I may have one. That's what you want. You see, this is what the eBay guys sell. You see how thin that belt is? And this is more like the right size. I don't know whether this is too big or not. I guess I'll put it on here and see whether it slips. It's the closest one that I have. So keep my fingers crossed that this belt is going to do it. Should measure this thing too, just so I can order some more in, because it's the last one that I have. I don't know what this cost me, but it certainly was more than the 20 belts for 15 bucks or whatever the eBay ones sell for. You know, you buy a kit of like, you get like 20 or 30 belts for like 10 bucks. Now, you get 20 or 30 belts for 10 bucks, and out of those 20 or 30 belts, you might get one that actually works, and the rest of them are junk. Okay, that belt fits. Wow. Let's start to put this thing back together, and we'll plug it in and see how much better it sounds with the proper belt. And it will sound better for sure. Just gotta get this in place. And then put the screws back in. Alright, so let's, whoops, what did that fall out of? You're wondering where this came from. There's two of them. It fits into, there's a hole right here in the chassis. This is part of the optical tape sensor. It picks up the light from that's shining through the tape reels and transports it to photo transistors. Actually, I think it's a transmitter and receiver that's on here. So there's an infrared sensor. There's two of them, one here and one here. There's one for the take-up and supply reel. So you actually have to take off the circuit board to get at this. If they fall out, and they will fall out if you remove the board. So that's where they go. There's one that sits here, and the other one sits on the other side. So once you've taken this apart, be sure that you get those lined up. And I think I'm going to cut this wire tie here just to make sure that I get everything lined up when I put it back together. Just get the wires out of the way so that I can line up the circuit board properly, so that I can screw it back down. It fits over this. If you look down here, it fits. The two of them fit right into. So this sits in here like that. It sits in like this, and then that sits over top. So we'll just use the flashlight to line it up when I put it back on, set it in place, and then put the screw in, and then I'll resolder the motor. There we go. That's in place. I'm going to put that screw back in for the motor, or for the circuit board, I should say, and then resolder the wires down for the motor. Just like that. And that's how they sit. You can see them there. One there and one over here. Okay, time to install the chassis again. And I guess I could put another wire tie on there just to tie these wires into place. We'll pull these ones into their proper position. Let's get another little wire tie, and we'll tie these wires back down out of the way. Wire tie through. Now I can feed the wires back through the back of the chassis, through the hole in the back here, put the mechanism back in place, and then we can test it and see how it sounds. I'm sure it's going to sound a whole lot better than it did when I started, because that belt that was on there was pretty bad, if I do say so myself. I've used some of those thin belts like on demos on tape decks that I've gone through the motions and done belt replacements, because I bought some of those crappy belts too, like everybody else, right? Didn't realize that they weren't the right size, because when they were advertised as, I think, 4 millimeters or 5 millimeter thickness, and then they turned out to be that they were like 3. So I ended up with some of them too, like everybody else. And I just use them when I'm doing a demo on how to replace a belt on a specific unit. And it's not one for a customer, it's one of my own that is not going to go back into service, so I'm not too concerned about how bad it sounds, because you know it's something that it's just going to go and be put back in a on a shelf somewhere and sit there. And then if I decide I'm ever going to sell the thing, well then at that point I'll change the belt, or I'll sell it as is. Right? But usually at that point I'll go and get the right belt. The problem is getting the correct belts these days is getting a little more difficult. It used to be just be able to go down to Main Electronics when they were around and say, hey, I need an FBM 8.4 or whatever, or 7.5 or whatever size of belt I needed, and chances are he had them in stock. But in the later years, well, he never had them in stock because he wasn't ordering parts, and the excuse was all the same. It was always, oh, I've ordered them and they haven't come in. You know, don't know when I'm going to get them. I've placed orders for hundreds and they haven't come in. Whether he actually placed the order and they didn't come in, or whether he was just telling people that he was placing the order because in the last few years the owner of the shop was quite sick, and he passed away I guess about 4 years ago now. But in the last couple of years it was getting more difficult to get things like belts. And all the other shops that were carrying them, they were all the same. Everybody was not stocking belts. Everybody local, that is, right? Everybody local stopped selling replacement belts, and it just became that much more difficult to get anything for servicing equipment, which is unfortunate, but that's just the reality. This is for the erase head, this one. And there's still a few places around that carry them, but they don't have all of them. They've got some of the more popular ones. One of them is local to me, and I've given people the name of the shop before. He doesn't actually have a storefront. He works out of his house, and it's mail order. But it gets expensive because when you order a belt, and belts themselves aren't that expensive. You can usually get most belts for $5 or $6 or even $7 if it's an expensive one, or if it's a turntable belt you could pay a lot more than that for it. But there's the shipping. You can't go pick things up from. I used to be able to go to his place. He works out of his house, like a basement in his house, and he had a door on the back with the name of his company, everything on it. I used to be able to phone him up and tell him what I needed, and then make the 20-minute drive out to his place and walk around back and knock on the door and pick up my parts. But I guess he got a visit from the city, and they told him he couldn't do that, and now you have to order stuff. And every time you order something, any part, there's an extra $5 in shipping that's added. So all of a sudden, parts have become a little more expensive. That those charges you have to pass on to the end user. So it's a little more of a challenge now to get a lot of these parts. Let's see how the speed is now. Whoops! I think I better plug the front panel in first before I try operating it. It's not going to go very far without the buttons plugged in now, is it? They plug in right there. All right, now let's try it now and see how it sounds speed-wise. Oh, listen to that. Much better. We're not going quite the right speed yet. We'll fix that. But gone is that ugly flutter, or that ugly wow. So adjust the speed. Just gonna get this out of the way. Look at that, eh? We're pretty close. That is right on the money. We'll put the 3 kilohertz side on the flutter test and see how it sounds. Oh, much better, much better. Guy that owns this will be happy. Okay, I guess it's time to start putting this thing together, and we'll check it out. I can probably check the azimuth on this too. I'll put it on the scope. So I'll put a few screws in to hold the front panel on, because I don't need to get behind here anymore. Put the bottom on it for that matter too. And then we'll just take a listen to the check the azimuth. It probably doesn't need to be touched though, because unless somebody's actually been into it and messed around with it, it won't have changed. So we'll just take a listen and see how it looks. I always unplug the power when I deal with these bases that have to go under a lip, because you never know if you touch something, right? So it's always a good idea to power it down when you're fitting these bases like this. If I look down here, it looks like the paint seal has been moved on this, so it looks like the head may have been tweaked. So I'm going to put my 3 kilohertz tone on. You can do it with 7 kilohertz. 3 kilohertz is generally enough. I've got my scope hooked up. It's basically just hooked to the left and right outputs. I've got it right here in the back, left and right, and I've got my scope in XY mode. Let's see how the phase looks. Okay, there's the scope. Yeah, it's a little bit off. So basically, the diagonal line I see there, that's my X input, and the Y input is superimposed over the X and Y input is superimposed. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust the azimuth screw, which is the one on the left side of the head, and see if I can get that circle to disappear, because ideally we do not want that. We want it to be as close to matching the other line as possible. Wandering a bit, that's just the tape. And also when you do this, try to use a non-magnetic screwdriver to do the adjustment, because otherwise you'll certainly affect your readings for one, and it's not good to put a magnetic screwdriver next to a magnetic head. It has a tendency to magnetize it a bit. That's probably about as close as I'm going to get it. And when we just look at a dual trace, that's more like what we want to see. The reason it's doing its phase is shifting is because obviously the tape itself is riding a bit back and forth over the head, probably the pinch roller. So what happens is the pinch roller wears, and as the pinch roller wears, and by the way, I did clean this before doing the adjustments, but as the pinch roller wears, which is right down here, if we look at this, you can probably see that the surface is not completely even. And the problem that happens is once the pinch roller starts to wear, it will start to pull the tape slightly, and the tape will start to ride around like that. And as the tape rides back and forth like that, it will change the phase that the head is reading. So your azimuth will never stay perfect once the pinch roller starts to wear. And the problem is you can't get the pinch rollers anymore. And the so-called aftermarket ones, well, most of them are not very true. When people try to rebuild them, a lot of times they are not that good. They're not perfectly round. So it's once the pinch roller starts to wear, you start to get some slight phase shifts like we're seeing here on the scope. So that's what causes that bit of a phase shift. And you can adjust it. I mean, look at this. I picked the unit up from the front, and just picking the unit up, I cause a phase shift between one channel and the other. Just pushing on the cassette, I cause a phase shift. So it's not really that critical, but it is there. And there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do about it. All cassette decks are going to have some phase, phasing problems, and there's not a lot that one can do about it. When I switch this back down to XY, it shows up there, you see? And that's just the tape riding back and forth on the head. The more important question, of course, is how does this sound? It's going the right speed now. Sounds pretty good. Let's do a test recording and see how it records. Okay, I'm going to record this track with Dolby B. I'll let this record for a minute or so and we'll play it back right into the camera and see how it sounds. Here's playback right off the tape. And yes, that tape is kind of chewed up. That's why it's sounding like that. Okay, that sounding pretty good to me through the speakers. Yeah, I'm going to say this one's done. So that's what happens when you put in the wrong belt. It's going to sound like crap. As I say, finding the correct belt now is becoming more of a challenge because there's so many of these thin, like 2 or 3 millimeter wide belts that's all over the internet. When you order them, they don't tell you that they're thin belts like this. Some of the ones I've ordered have said they're 5 millimeter. And you order a pack of 30 belts, and you get one belt that's 4 or 5 millimeters, and then the rest of them are that. That's how some of these eBay sellers are getting around having people send them the order back, because they're not telling you how many 5 millimeter belts you're getting. They're saying an assortment of belts, 3 and 5 millimeters, and you get one that's 5 millimeter and the rest of them are this crap, and these ones are just absolute junk. Anyway, as you heard with the wow and flutter before changing it. Anyway, this one's done. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye.